Welcome to the Neutral Ground. You've heard me talk on this podcast about neo-modernism and how we're moving into a realm of yearning for narrative reassurance, for stories that challenge us to think about right and wrong, good versus evil, and asks us to consider what that even means. Our guest this week is author Kevin M. Kraft, and he is, in my opinion, a neo-modern author, an individual who is writing stories about heroism, about suffering, about struggle, about strength, and about faith. And just because it isn't postmodern, it doesn't mean that it is without complexity. Kraft's works require and/or demand a strong connection with the reader. You have to think while you're reading his works. And I encourage anyone who is looking for inspiration to be more heroic, to be closer to family, and to be prepared to heed the call to adventure when life throws adversity your way, to consider reading Kevin's books and to take in a little neo-modern motivation. Now, if you appreciate my work on this podcast and the conversation, slide your finger over to the subscribe button. Like Doboro, one of Kevin's heroes, slides his fingers up and down the strings of his cigar box guitar before he is about to bring justice to those who cause great suffering in the world. Or you can simply click the subscribe or follow button with your mouse. It's up to you, really. If you're so moved to do so, there is a list of ways that you can help support the podcast in the episode description, along with links to Kevin's works. But more than anything, I appreciate the time that you're giving me right now. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Kevin M. Kraft. Kevin, welcome to the Neutral Ground. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, I wanted to have you on because even though I don't talk a lot about kind of modern writing, there are certain aspects of your particular writing that spoke to me, and that I've even talked about on the podcast with my audience as well. Some of that being narrative clarity or narrative assurance. You offer very clear narratives that we can follow and get behind. And I think that speak to a yearning that we have today for clarity and for challenging us in a particular way, in this idea of a, dare I say, an old-fashioned kind of narrative of good versus evil, and how do we as human beings confront evil? Well, we grow through strength and adversity, through connections with our loved ones, with human beings, and even with our faith. And that really spoke to me and why I wanted to have you on here today. Now, I want to begin because I love professionals in everywhere. And I want to ask you a little bit about your journey, if you can talk with us about what was your journey like becoming an author? Did you always love writing?
Yes, always. As long as I can remember, I loved great storytelling from a very early age. My dad used to read me Bible stories and everything. My older brother used to tell great stories. And I had teachers, in kindergarten and stuff that read. And I remember very early on thinking, man, I love great stories. And I'd love to be able to be someone who could be a great storyteller. And I remember thinking that from really early on, like kindergarten, first grade. And as it came about at around, third or fourth grade, I started to exhibit storytelling ability with my, writing assignments from my teachers and stuff. And I'd regale my teachers and my fellow classmates alike with stories. By the time I was 10 years old, I had written my first novel. I put it in quotes because I was just a kid. I taught myself how to type. A typewriter, those things. If you remember what those are.
Oh yeah.
And my parents bought me one for Christmas. And I remember I beat that thing to death. I wrote so much short stories, and I think I wrote my first novel when I was 10 or 11. And I was always loved storytelling, and that continued right up until now. So yeah, I was always writing something.
The writing kind of teacher in me wants to ask you this as a follow-up. Do you find, because one of the things that we try to teach even college students is that writing is not simply about expression. Writing is also, in many ways, the highest form of thinking that we can do. And oftentimes, my students will laugh at this. I'm always yelling at them. It doesn't matter if you don't know what you think, just start writing. And eventually, your mind will start clarifying where it needs to go because every word has to connect in meaningful ways. Do you find that also when you're writing, you're doing your best thinking as well?
Yeah, I think so. I'm certainly doing my most powerful and energetic thinking because I tell people that I teach it as well that it's one thing to write, and it's another thing to write information, and it's another thing to craft words, and that's what a lot of people don't make that connection, and it's like anybody can write information. I told my own kids when they started writing. My daughter's a novelist as well, and my eldest daughter. And I remember telling her early on, it's like, I'm reading her work. I was like, okay, you're writing down good information, but I want you to tell me a story. I want you to lead me through this story using the words as your vehicle. And I think she got it, and most people, once I explained it, I think they finally get it. It's like, also tell people too, it's like, not everybody can write. Not everybody's a writer, and not every writer can write fiction. As you got textbook writers that can write that, but fiction writers, that's a whole different kind of class of writing. But I'm very, very interested in word crafting, being a wordsmith. And hopefully I've mastered that at least to some degree. I always hope to do more of that. But that's something, yes, that's definitely something that is very important to me. It's being able to craft a narrative, craft words, tell a story that is compelling and pulls people through the journey of the characters that I create. So
Yeah, and the thoughtfulness can definitely be seen in your writing. It comes out of the page, it really does. So let's jump into this a little bit here, and I want to begin by talking about your character Doboro, right? And specifically, the first novel, The Bottlenecker, and I want to do our best here to not spoil things because I want people to get this on their own a little bit. So we'll talk mostly thematically here a little bit and just kind of get an understanding of how you arrived here. So let me begin here. I want to say I come from a place where I've studied as part of my own research for a long time the epic hero, specifically from all the way from Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia through Milton and Paradise Lost. And so I love the warrior man of faith or individual person of faith, that kind of warrior figure. I find that to be the most compelling. I always have. I want to ask you about the origin here. Maybe first a creative question. Where did this character Doboro come from within you? What was it that called you to write this kind of archetypal figure?
Doboro he's kind of a mosaic of all of my loves. I love my family and my daughter, of course, my daughters, my kids. So that's where I find his core. I'm a man of faith, of course. But there are also things about him that I love. I love his hat that he wears. I wear the same hats, I love the music he plays, the cigar box guitar and the blues and everything, slide guitar. That's me. I like his what's the word? Resilience, like the phoenix coming out of entity and really losing everything to emerge stronger than he was and better than he was before in a lot of ways, despite his disability and being visually impaired. And I love the martial arts and everything has always been a real big fascination with me. So he embodies all of my loves, and this one character. As a matter of fact, I can even say that Dobro is me. If I were to go through what Doboro went through, I would be like him. And so a lot of his responses would probably be my responses, at least by my estimation, if I were to go through the same things that Doboro did. So that's where he comes from. I think he finally coalesced when I became a parent, and my daughter was my firstborn. My daughter was born, and I just all the instincts and the internal responses of being a father to this little girl and all that entails, I kind of transferred myself into Dobro's character too, and with his responses that come to his daughter and the story and his family and everything. So yeah, he's very much me.
I don't want to overstate this, but I find it really fascinating what you just said, and I'm wondering, at a certain point, while you were sort of writing yourself in this character a little bit, was the character also imprinting on you as well as you wrote it? Did you find yourself kind of also, dare I say, like kind of learning from the character, or more about yourself from the character?
Yeah, yeah, I think so because we are very closely. I'm very closely tied to the character, and so as I'm, it would seem almost crazy to somebody who doesn't write, but when I write, it's almost as if I have two brains. The one brain is writing the story, and the other brain is reacting to what is happening in the story as if I'm watching a movie or I'm watching myself. And so, and very, very often there'll be something that'll happen, and especially in character of Dobro, where like he'll do something, right? I'll write it, and it's like, oh, I can't believe he did that. It'll surprise me, but I'll learn more about myself because it's me. Dobro is a lot of me is in Dobro, and so his reactions are mine, and I'm realizing, yeah, there's, you know, I have respect for Dobro and what he went through, and I'm just like, yeah, that's, I admire him in some ways, quite frankly, because of what he's gone through and what his character goes through. I can relate to that, quite definitely. So
It's amazing to me that power that writing has. I mean, there's a reason why we've been writing for as long as we have as a species in all manner of ways. Journals and diaries, things like that. It really does help us understand better kind of the world around us, and provides us a wonderful space to work out potential problems too. And it reminded me also of, I had a guest on named Angus Fletcher, who wrote this wonderful book called Wonderworks. And this book is basically a study of how literature has helped us in various ways to deal with loss as actual tools, is his argument, that they're actual tools that we've created along thousands of years to help us be heroic. And that's also one of the things that your book even made me think of, and even just what you said, was how we reading can be so powerful in helping us be courageous and connect with that larger species of humanity.
yeah. Yeah, and in many ways, I found myself wanting to aspire to be like Dobro in some ways, So yeah, I get what you're saying. You're absolutely correct. Yes.
I would love to be like Doboro too. Actually, it's a fantastic character. Well, let me get a little more specific than here even. So you have a character named Sujin, and Sujin actually is quite a great human being, very approachable and loving and caring. And she helps Doboro quite a bit at the beginning when he's kind of suffering and trying to get better. But there's this interesting exchange at the beginning when they meet. They both kind of question differences in culture and even in ethnicity. But as Doboro is sort of at his height of suffering, he's crying out and he's calling out to God. And Sujin remembers that she had done a similar thing. And we're reminded about how much the human being is bound to this connection of suffering and loss. Can you talk a little bit about how suffering and loss functions in the world of your works?
Yeah, it's very much a central theme and a lot of my work. More specifically, I'm constantly, I'm constantly addressing the fact that, things happen to us that, we may regard as bad or painful, suffering, as the Bible says, in this life you will have suffering. And, very oftentimes things will happen to us that we question. We don't know why they happen. They seem to, like God lowers the boom on us every once in a while, just to, and we're not always given answers as to why, except to know that, nothing touches our life without first passing through the hands of God, no matter what it is. And that's both a statement of faith. It's also pretty scary sometimes, when things do happen to us that we're like, what in the world? Where did this come from? Why is this happening to me? And we sometimes get no answers. And so a very well-visited theme of mine is, trust God no matter what, understanding that it passes through God first to touch you, and that he has his reasons. He may not always explain them to us, so that's a very important thing. And God, he wants us to cry out to him. He's a loving father. And so, he suffers with us, even as he's allowing this to happen to us, and he's there to bear us up at the same time. He hears our cry. And so it's like it's almost like, very often in our stories, modern day stories, there's always a neat wrap up, and everything's explained and everything's worked out, and and a happy ending. It's like, well, that real life isn't like that, and so I try to reflect that in my novels, and with the characters, putting them through things as, I guess, God, they're God. I'm kind of like, putting them through things, and I'm not explaining to them why, but I'm observing them, and I'm compassionate toward them, and I'll help them. It's almost blasphemous to say, but I've told people, it's like, the one thing I love about the Creator is that he's placed in his creation the ability to create in us, and we, in a very small sense at least, as fiction writers, as we create characters and everything, we kind of understand in a little bit what it's like to be God and to create characters and to create this situation, create the world. And I think that almost, it's a blessing to see that, because it's like, we don't explain things to our characters all the time, and God doesn't. He's not required to do so either. But we have faith in him, and we trust him anyway. We know he loves us. He cares. He has a greater purpose that we can't even possibly fathom. And we're just playing our part in it. And sometimes God only knows is the best answer we can have, and it is the best answer we have. So yeah, that's kind of what I try to place in all of my books, is that idea.
When I was reading through the book, the Bottlenecker, there's a point in the book where our hero has, lost pretty much everything. And I thought you were going to do a very modern thing, but you didn't. Because kind of the very modern thing, whenever, I'll say it this way, because I've talked about this on the show, the postmodern reading of the hero is very complex. And in postmodernism, I think when people have tried to write that kind of man of faith warrior, it tends to become very flat. And the reason why it reads flat, to me at least, and you can comment on this as well, is because either they make the character too faithfully perfect, as if they understand everything. They've got this grand clarity that no one even in the Bible had. Or they dilute the faith so much that you kind of are left thinking, well, wait a second, do you have a structure of faith there at all? In which case, what exactly are you kind of struggling with? What you did, that was why I thought it was fascinating, was you keep the substructure of faith underneath the character at all times. And that creates a true drama, a true problem, a grappling, because the hero can't simply dismiss the faith and say, I'm going to do my own thing. To do so would be like dismissing a truth, like dismissing gravity in some way. And that is what actually creates the beautiful struggle I think that you have in the novel. Can you talk a little bit about your kind of either the comment itself or the creative part of maintaining that substructure?
No, I appreciate you saying that. That's I have explained it in this way to other people who have noticed that is that very often uh, Christian writers, I'll say in particular, write a story with a message in mind, and then everything that they write is built up, packed around that message, and it becomes very heavy handed, and it becomes almost unnatural and unrelatable in some ways. But what I try to do is I create characters. In this case, in Dobro, he's a believer. That much is clear. He's probably more of a believer after he goes through what he goes through. But I don't have a message in mind. I let the message come organically through watching this character and his actions. And so it isn't perfect all the time, but he's faithful. And I think that's why people relate to my characters in my books. Even those who aren't believers get that. It's not that I'm trying to beat them over the head with a particular Bible message. Is I'm letting the characters live their story, and their actions determine what message, whatever message the reader gets from it. But that's very important to me. I'm less interested as a novelist to control my characters as I am to let them live, let them move, and I'm interested too sometimes in saying what the outcome is. I don't always have an outcome with each novel that I write. I very much write by the seat of my pants. And so I'm surprised when I get to the end. Sometimes, that's how I work. But I think that's why people respond so well to my writings, because they don't feel like they're being preached to. They're just watching the story, or they're watching this character who happens to be a believer live out his faith, And I don't know if that's so much a statement about myself or my characters, but hey, it works, and I think people get a lot more out of it because of that.
So let me ask you about a little bit about this, because again, something you said really made me think here. I think, does writing, because you don't shy away from including that you write with a context of faith in mind. You don't shy away from that. And so is it in some ways then perhaps easier to let the faith come through if you write from the perspective of the character, as opposed to writing from the perspective of the faith and then fitting a character around that? Is it more freeing, you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's the world to me that I create seems it seems real. I'm not trying to create the faith, as it were. It's already a part of my world, and I just plug it into this world. And how are these people going to respond or react to what I put them through? Be it a man who loses everything, his family and everything in the sight, or somebody that's that's fleeing from a big 7-foot hairy monster. It's like, okay, so how are these people of faith react in this situation? Whatever fantastic situation I can think to plug them in. So.
Well, when you are writing then from the seat of your pants and you're stopping at a particular point of crisis, let's say, can I ask you what is your process by which you try to think through how the character would authentically react here?
If it's somebody like Doboro, who's very close to me, I simply sit and think, okay, how would I react? And I really put myself through it. It's like, yeah, I've done this. Has happened to me. How do I react? How might I react? And that's how I approach it a lot of the times. If it's somebody that's a little different from me, and I can't think of too many protagonists that are that much different from me, that I have to think too hard about it. But if somebody that's a little different from me, I'll kind of say, okay, now if I were this person, and I lived this life or had these, if this was a reality in my life, that isn't really in mind, then how would I react? So I'm pretty good at kind of just putting on the skin of someone, of another character, even if it's for somebody different from me. Because even the villains that I write are, are me in some way. And so I kind of put on the skin and say, okay, I'm this person. How would I react if I were them? And that's kind of how I think through, those processes is, what would I do?
Yeah, and what you just said too, I hadn't thought of it before this way, but you are a very archetypal kind of writer. And when you just said that sometimes even the villain, I'm in the villain as well, it made me think of right now. What's very big is people like to talk about the psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung again. People like to talk about Jung. And Jung is all about the collective unconscious and the archetypal figures. And what I connected with here was your character, Dr. Bake, who is Sujin's father and represents this kind of wise old man figure. And what I liked about him, of course, is he's entertaining for one thing. He's brash, he's blunt, he's upfront, he tells you exactly the truth that maybe you don't want to hear. And that made me want to ask you this. One, was it difficult to write a character who's so kind of, let's say, insensitive? Because he is kind of insensitive here. What was it difficult to write that? And is there a commentary in there from you about maybe something that we're missing or at least need a little bit more of, you think, today?
Yeah. To answer your first question, it wasn't that hard to write because I know that, I've been in situations, in adverse situations myself, be it a physical challenge or an emotional challenge, where I had to really, talk to myself and tell myself things that I didn't want to hear at the time. You got to get up. You've got to get over this. You've got to stop feeling sorry for yourself, and all those types of things, that I'd say to myself, or that somebody has said to me in so many words. Beck is taken to an extreme, which is what made him so entertaining to write, because he said some things that even I wouldn't say to myself, but I think that he's interesting to write. But yeah, I think we live in a culture, and it pains me to see it, where people are more given into their emotions. And we used to, some of us use the term snowflake to describe the younger generation, because they're taught that their feelings are the most important thing in the universe, and anything that they hear or somebody says that doesn't make them feel good, or worse, makes them feel bad, is bad. And so they're it's like they want everything to be easy, they want everything to be nice, and to be sweet, and that is just not life. And you won't get very far in life with that as your philosophy. But we see it in our culture a lot. It's like people, they have no control over their emotions, because their emotions are everything, and so they're given to their emotions, and and because of it, they're weak, they're easily triggered. That word so much, easily triggered. Triggered used to be a term that was only used for war veterans, and yet people use it every day to describe how they feel at a certain moment about a little thing that they heard that hurt their feelings or didn't make them feel good. I'm triggered. I'm triggered. I hate that. I do. I hate that, and I don't want to see that, and I certainly don't want to see that in myself. And so, I think that it's something. Yeah, we definitely need to get back to people saying, there's a time where you need to just grow up, and you need to realize that your feelings are driven by the wind. Quite frankly, somebody changes a light in the room, your feelings are going to change, and you can't live that way. That's not a realistic way to live. It's not a healthy way to live. And I think it would be great if we started teaching, especially our children, that, we got a whole generation that is just emotionally driven, and it is done no good for our culture. It's done no good for them. So that's where I am with that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I try to build in my students is resiliency. And the way that I do that at the beginning of the semester is we do a lot of, in addition to notes and writing and discussions, we do a lot of group challenge exercises where I will purposefully put a timer as big as I can make it on the projector. And at the beginning of the semester, I'll ask them, does that make you anxious? And I'll get a lot of, yeah, it kind of does. I said, okay, that's okay. That's all right. Your goal is going to be by the end of the semester to look at that as nothing more than time and numbers. And when you go into a chaotic situation, I want you to feel like you can assert some order on chaos and take control of that moment. And I have to say, the students, at least in my experience, have done a pretty wonderful job overall when you do challenge them to say, hey, let's learn from this, let's build up this resiliency. They have it in them to do it, and they're wonderfully courageous with that. In some ways, I do wonder if we just need to challenge them more.
I think you're right. I know I used to work at a children's hospital out here, a children's psychiatric hospital, and and I was amazed how receptive the kids were when you challenged them. And like you said, kids are naturally resilient. That's just something that God places in them. They have to be, but because they've learned in this culture not to be, to be easily disturbed, to be easily upset, to be easily triggered, and I sit down with them because some of them have come in because of, they were triggered by something, didn't get what they want for Christmas. Their parents said no or something about something, and I'll sit there and talk to them, and I'll listen to them. I'm very, I can listen, and I'm, nodding, yeah, what about this? I ask them questions and everything, and I'll usually get to a question like, okay, so when your parents said no to you, uh, did that hurt you? And they're like, well, yeah. I said, well, why? Because I didn't get what I wanted. And I said, oh, do you always think you're going to get what you want in life? And sometimes they'll act like it'll be like they never heard that before, or and it's like, yeah, you won't always get what you want, but you got to expect that, and you can't let not getting what you want all the time, tie you down or defeat you, and so I'm always surprised whenever I get the kids like that, and they're like, no, yeah, I guess you're right, and it's like because they're not taught these things like they should be. So
Yeah, I agree. I think we definitely we forget how resilient young people are, young adults and children in general, and how they can take a lot more than we give them credit for, quite honestly, and they can do wonderful things, and we should expect wonderful things from them, to be honest. So yeah, we're in agreement there. I I want to talk about this father son, because this also even connects back, and we'll transition a little bit from Doboro here even into your novel Momo as well, but we can kind of move back and forth a little bit if you want here. The way you depict father son relationships I found to be incredibly uplifting, and I even just had a conversation with an author of really young children books named Ashley Finley, who wrote this beautiful book about the love of a father. And she just focused on that, the unconditional love of a father. That's what it was called. And this relationship between fathers and children just to me seems to have become so simplified. Whereas just trying to think about being a good father, let alone the actual relationship itself, but just trying to think about what does it mean to be a good father is complex enough. When we simplify it too much, we really do reduce, I think, the father to simply a cardboard cutout. And what I appreciated, especially with Momo, with your novel Momo, was the relationship between Mark and Evan. Mark is actively trying, to his detriment, really. He's trying too hard to think about what it means to be a good father. Can you talk a little bit first about what it was that made you get into that conversation and write, let's say, Momo, or write about that relationship?
I think again, it occurred after I became a parent, and I began to, you think even as a youth, when I have kids, I'm going to fill in the blank, and but it isn't until you have children that you realize how nuanced it is, how complex it is. It isn't I'm a father, do what I say, and, obey me and that kind of stuff. It's so much more layered than that and so much more complicated than that, that I started, when it came to the father and son, I was tempted to make it just a kind of a real straightforward father-son relationship, but then I thought, you know, even with my own kids, I had to learn, and that's when I had more than one kid. When you have two, like Bill Cosby says, I don't call somebody that has one child really a parent because there's too many things missing. But when you have two kids, you have to learn how to love each child individually as well as collectively, because they're two totally different individuals with a whole different set of rules and schematics and everything. One of the biggest mistakes I made was trying to treat my third born similar to my firstborn because they had similar personalities, and that didn't work at all. And I realized, my gosh, I've got to really. I mean, this isn't just a one book, parenting style handbook. I've got four now. By now, I got four individual kids that have their own vast book, and their own vast, makeup that I have to learn. And so when it came to writing Mark and Evan, I thought, it's so easy for us to try to fit our kids into our mold or the mold that we make for them. And in so doing, sure, we may love them, but we may inadvertently demonstrate to them that we don't like them as they are. We want them to be like this or like we are or something like that. And it's very easy to do because that's easier, right? For them to be like us. So that's kind of what I wanted to write that into Mark and Evan's roles. And to tell you the truth, I got a lot of response from that from readers about, and they said that made me think of my relationship with my father and my relationship with my sons. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize I touched upon something, as electric as that. But yeah, that's a very important element in the relationship, and it makes them sympathetic because people can relate, to them in some way, shape, or form. So.
I'm not surprised that people reached out to you about that in a very positive way because, like I said, I think it's just we tend to think of the father figure as such a simplified form today, somewhat, that I could see where people would really appreciate having a bit more complexity in thinking about, first, what does it mean to be a good father? And then to think about, how do I apply that, right? Because again, he's a flawed individual, Mark, in the sense, but flawed in a nice way, a meaningful way. He wants to do good. He really does. And so you're also exploring something that we don't see often in any media, writing or even movie or TV. This concept of, usually when we see a father who has done wrong, let's say, it's a pretty clear narrative that it's wrong. Like, it's bad what they did. This was wrong, but in a meaningful, good intentioned way. And I want people to really understand, I think, how uplifting even that is for someone to hear, that it's okay to be wrong. And your intentions do matter here, but you can still be wrong and rectify it. Can you talk even a little bit about, was there a thought process there in how to make Mark a flawed character?
Yeah. Beyond what I said, I kind of looked at myself, as a father, you want to be the perfect dad. and you don't want to make any major mistakes. You certainly don't want to be wrong if you can help it. But, there are times that I am, and I had to learn really early on, even when they're just barely walking, where you have to be able to, I think that's one of the most important things for a child to hear early on in their childhood is for a father, especially, to say, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was totally mistaken. I am so sorry about that. I think that makes a big difference. And I think that it's sad that probably a lot of kids don't hear that from their father. It's always, even when they're obviously wrong, that they won't admit it, because they feel that that's a sign of weakness, or it's a sign of it's taking authority away from them as the parent or something. But I think just that's very important. And that was important. I wanted to get that, into Mark's character too, that, when it's all said and done, he can admit, that he's wrong and make changes when necessary. So yeah, that was very important for me.
Evan, in many ways, because Mark is dealing with a generational kind of problem here as well, between his father and then passing that down to Evan. Let me ask you kind of a writing question and a psychology of your character here. Does Evan break a chain there of events where you have the anxiety of the father continuing downward to the son or to the child? Does Evan break that link?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that it does so, like when Mark can admit, that he was wrong, at least in his method. And I think, yeah, apologizing to him. I think Evan, now it was demonstrated to Evan that, I can be a father, and I can be wrong and admit it, and still be the father, still be a good father. As a matter of fact, be a good father because of it. And so, yeah, I think that in my mind, that chain was broken with Evan. And
That's wonderful, and you're providing hope to others as well at the same time. Something else that I loved particularly about this book, one of my favorite books in the Old Testament is the book of Job. I love it. I could read that over and over and over again, constantly, and get something new every single time. And of course, in Momo, you mention this. And in doing so, you set up our minds to be thinking about the book of Job as well. And where that spoke to me is, and again, I want to be careful not to give stuff away, but I'll just say toward the very end, Mark is in a very bad situation. And he's separated from Evan. And he's confronted with a very with the 7-foot monster here that you mentioned earlier, and he's thankful. It's a fantastic little nuanced moment here that harkens to something that many people who read the book of Job struggle with constantly, this idea of how can you be in some way thankful for adversity that just seems absolutely ridiculous to do so. And yet here's your character in this beautiful line. He's seeing the adversity in front of him, and he says, "Thank you, Lord, for this." Can you talk more about that conceptual state of mind of being thankful for adversity there?
Yeah. I learned it from Job, obviously, because Job's situations where he loses everything and then some, and yet he still worships God, and I mean, he's to the point where his wife is even telling him, just curse God and die, and he rebukes her for that. That's a constant thing that you find in the Bible about always giving thanks to the Lord. And rejoicing in the Lord always, and then it goes back to what I was saying before. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, something came up on my screen. Yeah, it's the whole idea of, trusting God and believing God no matter what. And so that was really important to me. I've been in situations myself, again, I draw from experience and, adverse situations that I've had. where, even in the midst of the worst of it, somehow being able to, to bless the Lord, oh my soul, and in all things give thanks. It's totally counterintuitive. It's totally opposite of what our human nature tells us, and that's the point. It is joy that transcends anything else, and it's joy that is promised, to those who love God, and so I have learned in certain situations, that I had that within me, thank God. And so I think that, and it's something that I don't think it's necessarily, it's something it's not taught a lot, even from the pulpit, rejoicing in the Lord always, giving thanks for all things, not just some things, but for all things, and again, realizing that nothing touched our life without passing through the hands of God. And in that, being able to rejoice in the Lord and to praise God regardless. That's what the apostles learned, and their example was Jesus himself, but listen to their stories, that they faced awful, adversity and hardships because of their faith, but that they continue to worship God and praise God and testify of God no matter what they face. And they're our example. And so I thought it's important. It's important for me to realize that in myself. And that was important for me to impart to other people as well. And that's why I think it makes it kind of interesting too, by adding a dimension of a cryptid, monster, is that, okay, so what if that happened, to me? How would I respond as a believer? And anything that we face, I think we need to kind of have that filter, in our head. It's like, okay, this is coming, this is passing through God's hands. How am I going to respond?
Yeah, I think it is, of course, it's easy to say love adversity when you're not in an adverse situation. We know that, right? But the couple of times that I have had that wonderful clarity of thought in a bad situation, it has given me a tremendous amount of strength to think, put it on the cross, and let that kind of hold the weight. And you can kind of approach many terrible situations, I think, that way, and draw a tremendous amount of strength. And I really, again, this was one of those situations where I thought, as a writer, you could have gone another way, as a modern writer, let's say. But you didn't. You held your ground and kept that substructure there. And I think the book benefits tremendously from the faith that you had in your own characters in that regard. And why I think people, again, I'm not surprised that people would have very positive things to say about your work here. Well, we'll move a little bit toward the close here of our conversation. And I want to say thank you, of course, for being on. But I also want to ask you about, are there current projects you're working on and other things in your mind that you could share with our audience?
Yeah, some of the things I can, sure. I'm working on the fourth book in the Doboro series, so that's probably my biggest project, my biggest challenge right now. I'm going to be opening up a line of books for younger readers, probably like middle school and young adult readers. I got that idea actually from Momo, because Momo won a couple of book awards. One was for teen reading, another one's for young adults. And I thought, well, I can do this. And I wrote some other books in the past that I'm going to be re-releasing that were actually geared more towards younger readers of that same age bracket. So I'm going to re-release those and open up a line for younger readers. I'm going to write a book about that's like a creative writing instruction book, how to write effective, creative writing. So I'm going to be working on that now. Actually, it's actually part of I'm taking it from workshops that I used to do for the public library here about creative writing, different aspects. One for youth and one for adults and for Christian writers and for this and that and everything. So I'm going to kind of compile those in a short guide. Yeah, and some other things I'm thinking about doing a year, probably a year or two, maybe next year after that. I want to do a novel, a fictionalized version of the life of Adam and Eve after the fall, what life must have been like for them, east of Eden, as it were. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. I've been wanting to do that for years, and I've been thinking about it. It's been percolating in my head and fermenting and everything. And I think it could be a really powerful, what they call I don't know what they're called, but nobody's done that I know of, and I'm surprised because just the very idea, what was it like for Adam and Eve after the fall? What was the relationship like? How did it change? What challenges did they face after their expulsion from paradise and everything? It just really calls to me to write. So that'll be my biggest challenge, probably.
The two things that I love there. First, I love the fact that you're turning your attention to like kind of young adult, because they are craving. They're craving that kind of clarity of narrative and a little bit less of the complexity that we've been seeing in postmodern writing, this neo-modern writing of clarity of narrative and purpose, and trying to figure out, kind of questing to a degree, even a journey. And I definitely think that you could do that and add quite a lot of richness to their lives. So I think that's fantastic. The idea too of kind of the day after the fall as well is fascinating also, because that could be very helpful to people who feel like they have fallen. And to think about, again, reading and writing, it's not just entertainment. There are passages, there are ways into trying to figure out what it means to be human, and what does it mean to me to be human. There are ways of experiencing the world. And I think that could be very helpful for people as well. I think those are fantastic ideas.
Thank you.
Well, Kevin, you've been very grateful. You've been very generous, excuse me, with your time. And I'm grateful to you for that. I'll be putting links to your works in the episode notes, and I look forward to hearing more about your works in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a real honor to speak with you finally. I was looking forward to this, and I wasn't disappointed.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kevin M. Kraft. If you did, check out Kevin's works using the links that I've provided in the episode description section. And also consider following me on social media. Oftentimes I provide background notes on the show, some motivational thoughts from my favorite authors and philosophers, and I also give a song of the week with the hope of changing our algorithms a little bit on these social media platforms